now I understand what NA linear power is all about. What is up, guys? Today I'm sitting behind the wheel of a 1998 Porsche 911 Carrera S. So this is a 993 C2S, and I actually just got out of a 1977 911 S, which should have come out last week. So go check that video out. It was a hot mess. Literally, it was super hot in the car. The AC didn't work, and it was a pretty old car, one of the oldest cars I've ever driven. So it was a lot for me to process. And now I'm jumping about almost 20 years into the future, actually just over 20 years into the future, into this 993, and I immediately feel much more at home. And that's because the 993 feels a lot more like a contemporary 911 and the kind of 911s that I grew up on. In fact, this car was the 911 that was out when I was born. This car is just very special to me because it's what I remember seeing as a little kid. And the 996 generation, which is also a car I saw a lot growing up, is actually a lot more similar to this car than the exterior looks would lead you on to believe. So yeah, we're gonna get out onto the road in this and discuss why I think this car, the 993, which is already fairly expensive, is gonna only further continue to go up in value. And before we do that, if you enjoy the video, throw it a like, and if you wanna see more content like this, please subscribe. It tremendously helps out the channel. And without further ado, let's get out onto the road. Alright, so setting off here in the 993, yeah, I mean, I already mentioned that I already feel a lot more at home in this car, and part of that's probably because I'm a bit more accustomed to feeling a little more cocooned away from the road. This has a bit more sound insulation, it's a more compliant ride. The car is just a smidge larger, and I mean, not only is it 20 years newer, but it feels 2 generations newer, which is what it is. This is a really special driving experience. Now, once again, price aside, and to start this video off on the right note, I would absolutely take this as a weekend car in a 2-car garage. I would even be crazy enough to maybe want a daily one of these, but now adding some context, these are really going up in value, which is basically the entire theme of this video, and it wouldn't be wise to put on a whole boatload of miles or wear and tear onto one of these, because keeping them more original, like this car is 100% original, is smarter, and the values reflect that. A completely original 993 Carrera S like this with a 6-speed manual transmission easily can fetch upwards of $120,000, $130,000 with about 50,000 miles, which this car has. Obviously, this current market's crazy in general, and on top of that, we're in a little bit still in a little bit of an air-cooled bubble. But what's important to note is that this being a 1998 model year Carrera makes it the final model year of air-cooled 911, and on top of that, this being a 1998 once again gets the wide body, turbo body effectively standard. So I believe they only had that for 1998. So you get the wide body, the car looks absolutely stunning. It has a very narrow front end and a very thick rear end, so you get that teardrop kind of shape. It looks sensational. Now, the looks of the 993 in general are something you could kind of toss a coin on, because it has this modern retro look kind of going for it. You get some of that, you get like xenon headlights and kind of smoother body lines, the 90s, right? It's like when all of this stuff was becoming a trend slowly. At the same time, you have the classic 911 looks. So this kind of really, to me, is that middle ground between what classic 911s and even further back 356s were in the 50s and stuff and so on, and early 60s, I think late 50s, early 60s, versus what a brand new 2021 992 stands for. So you kind of get the in-between middle ground looks-wise. The rear end is super nice, and I think that the 992s have drawn a lot of inspiration from the rear end of this particular car more than any other previous 911. Yeah, the front end is not my favorite. No, neither is the 996's front end. I don't mind the .2 generation front end of the 996 too much, but the 996.1 is not my cup of tea, and this is only so-so. So I would take the looks maybe of the 930 over this overall, but the driving experience is just sensational in the 993. Now let's discuss the engine that provides a large portion of the driving experience just after a quick break because we have a lot of traffic. So, 1 second. So, the power plant here is a 3.6 liter naturally aspirated flat six, producing 282 horsepower and 250 pound-feet of torque. And I must say, it sounds absolutely fantastic. Beautiful naturally aspirated flat six noise. Love it. It's incredible. You know, turbos were great for power, but not so great for sound. So this is really clean. On top of that, it's of course a 6-speed manual transmission, and because it's a C2S, it's rear-wheel drive. So again, you have that wide body in the rear, the wide fenders, 6-speed manual, naturally aspirated motor. The power is not super high, but this car weighs, what does this car weigh? I don't even know. I forget how much it weighs, so I'm gonna put it over the screen right here, but I think if I'm correct, it's like 2,800, 2,900 pounds. So super, super light, relatively speaking, again, compared to modern cars. I'll admit that even your 991s, for instance, are not way heavier than that, but certainly all modern cars are just creeping up in weight. And as we move towards EVs, which will be very fast, we're only gonna see more and more of those weight increases. Now, Car and Driver tested the 993 Carrera S back in the 90s in 0 to 60 in 4.9 seconds, which is pretty quick, honestly, with the power numbers I just stated. I think this car is more like a mid-5, high-5s car in the real world, unless you're trying to destroy your clutch or your drivetrain. Like real world, setting off a little more aggressively, you could probably accomplish 5.6, 5.7. Now, Car and Driver also tested the 993 Carrera S in the 90s in the quarter mile at 13.6 seconds at 102 miles an hour. Look, that's not terrible, but for some context, a brand new Macan S accomplishes the quarter mile in the exact same time. So, Porsche's kind of mid-level crossover can do the quarter mile as fast as this. Again, this isn't a completely visceral experience, much more so than any modern 911. I can't really speak on the 911R or even a GT3 Touring, because I haven't driven those yet, but certainly more than your standard Carreras, manual or otherwise. They're just not going to compare with this in the sense of driving experience. But it is just funny to recognize that a Macan S is as fast in a straight line as this. Gives you just some perspective. Got ourselves some space, and we got ourselves a chance to do a little bit of a harder takeoff here. Not super hard, but as we roll into it, going through first, red line, second, and there's 60. So yeah, that feels like a mid-5 second kind of car. That was obviously off for a slight roll and downhill, but the point I'm trying to make is, unless you're trying to destroy your car, which I can't compare 2021 to a 1990s Car and Driver test, but this car is 24 years old now, 23, 24 years old, and it's just not gonna, 23 I guess only, but still, it's not gonna knock your socks off in a straight line. Where it is gonna knock your socks off is, holy, this is just like butter. Transmission is incredible. The gear, the throws are perfect. You can really sense where each gear is. I don't have a tremendous amount of experience with the latest gen Porsche manuals. I hope to, hopefully, in the near future, but this is about as sweet as manuals get. It reminds me of the M2 competition that I drove. That was a fantastic manual transmission, in my opinion, for a more or less modern car. Not quite as ridiculously sharp as both the Honda S2000 and the Mazda Miata, but this is just a sweet, buttery transmission nonetheless. And the power plant is, like, this is one of those cars where you go, now I understand what NA linear power is all about. Because in the likes of the GT3 RS that I drove, which I can link up above, the most hotted up 911 that I've ever driven, the car felt very antisocial in city driving. I wasn't able to bring it out to proper canyons to push it, unfortunately. And that, like, driving a 991.1 with an NA motor, in the modern context, it didn't feel, I mean, it was ridiculous, it sounded great, and it was very linear power, and it screamed, but I've driven too many forced induction 991 generation cars to understand and appreciate, oh, well, like a GTS with a lot of torque and a lot of power is amazing. But here, where this was kind of all it was, aside from the turbo model, now I'm like, okay, I understand. And to be fair, I've driven a 991.1 Carrera S, so I've experienced what an NA more or less modern 911 feels like, and that was sweet also. That was with a PDK, and this is just a little bit more of a visceral driving experience. You have actual hydraulic steering here, as a E92 M3 drives by me that also has hydraulic steering. It reminds me that it's really nice to feel the road. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of this video, which is why is, in my opinion at least, the 993 Carrera S going to only continue to go up in value. And it's because of much of what I mentioned. It's a very special car. It's a car that evokes the aura and vibe, if you will, of its era, you know, of the 90s. I've been fortunate enough to drive a Ferrari F355. I think it was a 1998 or 99 model as well, so just about the exact same era as this car. Actually, what I should say is almost the exact same model year as this car. May have even been a 98. But while that car, of course, being an Italian supercar, was very awesome, it lacked some of the drivability of this car. And even though we have the pedals offset to the right, even though the accelerator pedal still is just has such a short travel, funky stuff like that, even despite some of that stuff, this car is just oh so sweet and so much more drivable. And I think that it strikes this perfect middle ground. Jumping in here, you still get the 5 gauges. They're still analog. Oh, I love the analog gauges, and I ultimately prefer them to the semi-digital clusters of the present day. But this really is the sweet spot. I mean, you get a slightly more modernized interior. The build quality is definitely nicer, and everything just feels a lot more upmarket and newer, because it is. This feels like a car you just want to keep getting out onto the open road with. You get the hydraulic spoiler in the rear now, finally. It goes up with the flick of a button. You get AC that kind of actually works now. The seats, I would say, are a wash. They're a little more bolstered. The steering is a little more sorted. You actually finally get a little bit of wider rubber in the rear. Here I believe you have 285 section rubber in the rear, so creeping up pretty close to modern day 911 width, and that helps you feel a lot more planted in the corners. And if I drop a gear in this lovely transmission, I can really take turns with some decent speed. We're creeping into that modern car level of speed, but this really strikes the balance, and that's why I think as we move forward, people will really want to come back to these and get themselves into something that feels like a nice middle ground between the old stuff of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and then the newer stuff that we're moving towards hybrids and EVs. This is the sweet spot. The final year of air-cooled. It's beautiful. I definitely wish I had 150 grand to splurge on a 993 right about now. We got a sharp turn, so let's enjoy this turn in good health in the 993 Carrera S. Let's see. Drop a gear. Oh yeah, it hooks. It hooks up. It definitely hooks up. Oh, perfect. It dances. It just dances. It's not as ridiculously confidence inspiring as a modern car, but it just dances in the limit. Beautiful experience. And on that note, if you guys enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. New videos are dropping every single week. Comment down below. Let me know what you guys want to see, and I'll do my best to make it happen. And as always, this is Rio. Peace out.